Look, we've been talking the hind legs of a donkey about the president's speech at the UN earlier on. How is that playing where you are? What's going to be the headline there, George?
Well, I think you've got to bear in mind this is one of 3 days in a row where he's given quite meandering speeches. First, he did the Charlie Kirk memorial service where he went a bit off script, and whereas Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, was talking about forgiving the man accused of murdering her husband, he said, I can't forgive my enemies. And that obviously kind of jarred a bit with what she was saying. And he went off on a tangent, started talking about autism and linking it to paracetamol. So that then followed through to the Monday where he gave the press conference where he was talking about vaccines and paracetamol and how those contributed to ADHD and autism among children, a spike in diagnoses, which again was a pretty remarkable piece of TV. And now, for the third day in a row, we've been treated to the Donald Trump show. Yeah. And on this occasion, he talks about everything from the flooring of the UN headquarters in New York. So he's basically a bit peeved that just over 20 years ago, he didn't win the contract to do the refurbishment. And he doesn't appreciate the choice of terrazzo flooring. He wanted marble flooring. And so he's still angered by that. So he talks about that. He talks about air conditioning in Europe and how he doesn't believe that countries like France and Spain have enough air conditioning units, and that this isn't the Europe that he knows and loves. So it was an absolute pick and mix of topics today.
It was. I think he spent more time talking about the flooring and the walls at the UN than he did about the war in Ukraine. It was like listening to your boring next door neighbour going on about his builder. But as you said, Donald Trump's speech is simply what it is. I mean, I want to move on from that because we've chewed that one pretty extensively. George, can I just go back to you? A lot of waves here on this side of the water about and there too, one presumes, about the president last night making what he called the biggest medical announcement in, I think he said, in the history of America, when he spoke about his advice to American doctors not to prescribe Tylenol or paracetamol, as we call it here, for pregnant women. Well, we've seen the way that's got the debate raging. I mean, how's day two of that story there, George?
Well, and the advice to pregnant women themselves. He told them you've got to tough it out, ideally, if they're experiencing pain. Bear in mind that paracetamol was the kind of is really the recommended by obstetricians and gynecologists, pain reliever for women who are pregnant. So, look, I was struck last night watching it that the American broadcasters cut away. And I'm not sure if that was to do with the fact that they thought it was irresponsible continuing to broadcast this, or if it was to do with the fact that he went on for over an hour. Again, it was pretty freewheeling. And, I was flicking through all the major networks in the US, and eventually I had to rely on the kind of YouTube stream put out by the White House itself because everyone cut away because it just went on and on and on.
Really? What are you thinking now, day after?
Yeah, I mean, it is just remarkable, and it's scary, actually, because there will be people who, despite what maybe a lot of us have written and a lot of us have said, that will actually believe it. We'll just think, well, why would I take the risk of taking paracetamol? I will try to tough it out, as Donald Trump has said. And the possible repercussions for that are vast, aren't they? Medically, and also for the health of pregnant women.
I was talking to a GP today, who was saying that she and every GP dealing with an expectant a mother to be, would now feel they had to guide them away from this advice and deal with the anxiety which they expected to come in now in enormous volume.
And there's the fact that he produced no evidence at all, and he admitted he didn't have evidence, but he had a feeling that obviously that's what he's been told that by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his health secretary, and he's just going along with it, and it is just absolutely bizarre. If anything, even more bizarre than his speech at the UN, I think.
But George, it is kind of in keeping with the pattern of, the development of federal health policy.
Yeah, I mean, RFK Jr., who is basically made a career out of, casting doubt on vaccines and pretty established medical science, is his health secretary and was standing right next to him. And, he was able to say, not only are we looking at the links of drugs to diagnoses of autism, a rising number of kids being diagnosed with autism. He said we're also looking at vaccines as well, and it kind of spiraled from talking about paracetamol to talking about the MMR jab and the number of immunizations that children receive. So it wasn't like it was a kind of limited. It was billed initially as this kind of limited, targeted. This is what we think is the reason for autism, and this is the action we're taking. And then it turned into a kind of a denunciation of variously established scientific truths.
I'm going to change the subject, because when you're talking about developments in the USA, which we are kind of fond of doing, you've got to change the subject because there's always so much to talk about. So I want to ask you first of all, George, this will not in any way involves you straying away from your territory as an independent journalist who does not take sides. Are you watching Jimmy Kimmel tonight?
I have to say I've never watched Jimmy Kimmel live before. I guess maybe today would be a politically charged moment to start. It's interesting that the cancellation of all these, there was a debate initially about whether the cancellation of these late night TV hosts was about their networks pandering to Trump and them not wanting to annoy the White House, or if it was about a long-term trend, which is essentially declining audiences, that these once massive shows in the US are no longer getting as many viewers as they once did. And what triggered it was really the Stephen Colbert debate, and his show got cancelled. But then the interesting thing about Jimmy Kimmel and his remarks in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, where he kind of suggested that the shooter might have had kind of beliefs or been aligned with the MAGA movement, which later basically transpires to be wrong. But, when he got cancelled, what happened was that Brendan Carr, who is a Trump appointment and is basically the head of their equivalent of Ofcom, explicitly called for him to be cancelled because of those remarks. So there was no hiding away from the fact that this was a politically motivated decision. And then Disney obviously faces backlash over that decision. They run the show, and so he's been reinstated.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's worth sort of pulling apart some of the threads here. I mean, Tim, if a TV company takes objection to what, let's say, a comedian on a show says, maybe thinks it's insensitive, maybe thinks it's far too political, for whatever reason, they have the right to sack that person and take that show off the air. That then is a commercial decision by the boss of a network. It gets into a different place when the state, as it were, when the federal government gets in, calling that same shot.
Yeah, I think it's called the FCC, I think, isn't it?
The Federal Communications Commission.
Yeah, I think that was where I think the line was overstepped, was when you had a government body sort of trying to influence what the network wanted to do. Of course, it's muddier than that because there are certain networks that also have regulatory issues or regulatory preferences that they want from the White House or from the administration. So there's other ways that the pressure can be more subtle. But of course, it's not, we have this issue here. GB News in Britain is in some tension with Ofcom. Now, the same people who've been complaining about, the way the FCC have interfered in US affairs, quite correctly, actually have been egging Ofcom on in a lot of their battles with GB News. So I think we're at the point, really, where we have so much competition, in our media landscape now. I think these regulators should just basically butt out and let us as consumers basically decide, unless it's legally actionable, in contempt of court or something. I think most of us are grown up to know that when you're watching GB News, you're not necessarily watching the most balanced of channels. When you're watching a late night comedian, it's late night. It's after the watershed. Let us actually exercise our own judgment in these things.
Yeah, and it's because that line was crossed. This looks like something of at least a bit of a defining moment. We've got less than 5 minutes left. As I said, loads to get in. I want to consult you one more story, which I think is remarkable by British standards, like almost everything else going on in Washington. But where the Homeland Security Secretary, George, seems to tell me the background to this. He seems to have been caught on camera accepting money in a bag in exchange for promises of policy favours. The FBI watched it as part of a sting, and then when the presidency changed, the case was dropped, and now the White House is behind the Homeland Security Secretary. Have I got any of that wrong?
That sounds about right. Yeah, it's Tom Homan. And, Caroline Levitt was asked about this at her briefing. I guess it was yesterday, it must have been. Time passes quite quickly here. And she kind of dismissed all allegations. I guess in the US, they have this slightly different approach where FBI agents can go undercover and just give people bags of cash and basically what would appear a form of entrapment almost, from maybe European perspective. And he gladly accepted it. And then obviously the case has been dropped since the FBI has been taken over by Kash Patel, who's a Trump appointee.
Has this story got legs in America?
It's not like Trump has thrown any of his other appointees under the bus so far. I don't see
As a story, though,
start now.
Is the story going to roll for much longer? Is it part of the flooding of the zone? No, nothing lasts for very long.
I mean, the Witkoff family runs a crypto empire, as does Trump, that is having billions of dollars that is funneled into it. That is, on the scale of questionable practices, I think this is pretty small fry.